again, everyone. It's Rigas again from the Practice Research Agency, where every day we are thinking about how to best tap consumer consciousness, especially now in the modern digital age when so many important social dynamics have changed in terms of the way that we are all interacting. On that note, today we would like to explain the evolution of the understanding of brand image, or at least the evolution of how we've collected brand image, brand personality, or brand identity information in the past, and how we've managed to absolutely not only streamline, but quantify the qualitative process of understanding the intricacies of the entirety of brand identity. Now, the way we like to think about brands, before we go into that, we're going to just quickly describe how we think about brands. And we think about brands in three levels. We have what we call the rational level, which is, I guess, what you can easily say about a product or a brand. We have the more perceptual type level, which I guess is a kind of the way that the brand's personality might be perceived. And then we have a primal level, which is basically the experience of the brand archetype, if you like. So getting a little deeper, at least, into the subconscious or the unconscious aspect of consumer consciousness. And interestingly, those three levels of brand, if I could put them all together and call it sort of a brand position or a brand identity, seem to be borne out neurologically, more or less, in terms of the way that we understand the human brain or the consumer brain. This is now going back to what is called the triune brain theory. And the triune brain theory is really about understanding the three major components of the brain. Remember, we're keeping this very simple in order to try and allow people to express how they feel about products and brands, not just at a surface level, but also at a more subconscious level. And those three layers of the brain are ostensibly what we call the gray matter, the neocortex, which is what we know, what we can easily say about a brand or product, where that would reside. Then we have what we call the limbic system, a smaller part of the brain, or what we might call the emotional part of the brain, where things are felt, they can be expressed, but it's more difficult to express them, especially about brands. It starts to feel a little silly to talk about brands in this particular way. However, they are perceived in that way to an extent. And then, of course, the deeper one, which is the archetype, which is the kind of the role that brand plays at a kind of a deeper level. And we'll give you an example of what we mean by archetype when we come to show you some results. In the past, not just in the past, but right now, this very day, guaranteed, there are depth interviews or focus groups or qualitative research is being conducted to understand brand image, brand position, brand personality. And these qualitative researchers often using projective techniques in order to get to these more subconscious, unconscious layers, which is entirely valid. We could argue about how important all this stuff is to marketing, but it is entirely valid to use those techniques in order to get the different levels of association that we have with products and brands. And it was the case that these techniques have until now been the sole domain of the qualitative methodology. I and my colleagues, we've personally conducted so much qualitative work in this area using all kinds of projective techniques and whatnot. However, we've evolved the collection of this information, because one of the problems of qualitative brand image is precisely that, is the lack of quantification, if you like, the lack of robustness or validity in the results. As insightful as the qualitative results often are about brands, and they often do make a lot of sense, a lot of logical sense when they're uncovered and when they're expressed. But nevertheless, we need to move beyond that into something a bit more robust in terms of understanding how a brand is perceived, because the reality is a brand isn't perceived in just one way. We need to understand all of the facets of it, but also the predominant way in which it is being perceived at those levels. Previous attempts to quantify brand image and brand position were probably best expressed via the what used to be called the implicit system, which later became the need scope system, and both of these systems, one is an offshoot of another anyway, were dedicated to understanding the brand position and also brand image, the attributes that went along with that brand position. And it was a very sophisticated quantitative system that allowed us to measure brands and attributes. However, it was extremely cumbersome, very expensive to run, and relied on respondents wading through vast amounts of attribute lists, because the only way that we could translate or try and quantify brand image or brand position was through the construction of these attribute lists, which admittedly came from qualitative work, but also just came from libraries of attributes a lot of the time as well that were applied across studies, if you like, brand image style attributes. And so it became a little bit of a template and a cookie cutter and started and lacked the nuance required. And the other thing that's happened is that marketing has changed, and we don't need to be spending that amount of time necessarily, that amount of money and resource to understand brand position and brand image. There are books like How Brands Grow, which have poo-pooed a bit or debunked a little bit, or think that they've debunked a little bit the importance of brand position. They're probably at least half right. And especially in the modern world where advertising has become so fragmented and it's difficult to get people's attention long enough to build a brand image. So the concept of a brand position and a brand image has changed somewhat. Don't know if it's become less important, but less emphasis might be placed on it, or less resources might be dedicated to understanding it from a research perspective. However, it still needs to be understood. And what we'd like to present to you today is the way that we've adapted our qualitative methodology. Remember, that is qual and quant at the same time in a survey instrument. How we've adapted that methodology to understand brand image, brand personality, and brand archetype using only a handful of questions, most of them open-ended and probed using our qualitative avatars, which are evolving all the time, and are getting more sophisticated and better at probing and getting more depth out of respondents, and not just a few respondents and not just 30 respondents, but many respondents. And the examples I'm going to show you today come literally from the responses of hundreds, and in one situation, maybe close to 1,000 respondents. So let's refer to the screen here and where I'm going to show you some results. Firstly, let's deal with how we've captured the more rational part of the brand, which is what we call the overall brand image, if you like, what we can see, what we can say about the brand. And I'm not going to tell you exactly how we asked these questions, but I can guarantee you that these results have basically come from two open-ended questions, because we did two brands. This was a situation where we needed to understand the interplay between the master brand and the sub-brand, both of which were fairly reasonably well known in their own right, master brand and sub-brand. And there needed to be a reconciliation between these, but before that could happen, we needed to understand the brand image of each of those. And we didn't have the time or the budget to engage in any qualitative work here. We implemented the Qualantive system to give us the answers, and wow, did we get some answers. Not only did we get answers, we got very nuanced qualitative answers that then we were able to use in order to understand and compare the brand and sub-brand. Here, for example, are some outputs for various types of themes that were referred to when talking about the brand image. And here is the master brand. And we can see here immediately that the master brand themes that were spoken of, this is at a more surface level, at a brand image level, were very importantly bringing a sense of quality and trust to the equation. I'm not going to tell you the category of the brand, but that doesn't really matter. These are real results. Bringing a sense of quality and trust to the brand. Bringing that all-important category association, because this is a master brand operating across a number of categories, and we needed to make sure that there was an immediate association or sorry, not immediate, but a strong association at least with a particular category that our client was very interested in. And we can see immediately that things like the product availability and the variant of the product was important, and then value for money and affordability. And we were able to understand what underpinned each of these major dynamics. So for example, with quality, we're able to see here what underpinned the quality perceptions of this master brand. We're then able to understand what was meant by the availability and the appreciation of variety, for example, in that master brand as well. But of course, this same open-ended question, the same data was then treated to a different type of analysis from our AI. And that analysis, as you can see here, was understanding the sentiment about this master brand. So not just what was said about it, but the overall sentiment. And we can see here again that almost half the comments would be classified as positive. There's hardly any negative sentiment about the brand, and this makes a lot of sense. I don't understand why there would be negative sentiment about this brand. But as we see, there's a lot of neutrality about the brand. So understanding what, not so much what the negativity is about, because that's very small, but understanding what the neutrality is all about in order to try and convert people into a more positive impression. This is giving us the proportion of people who thought about the brand in positive and neutral terms, but then also what that meant, what underpinned, what underlay the positive and neutral comments. And then we could do the same for the sub-brand. And we can see here for the sub-brand that the things that came out much more importantly were a sense of efficacy, very, very important, quality, but the master brand brought a quality perception anyway. But what this sub-brand brought, and we can see this immediately, look, 40%, this is an open response question, right? So 40% of people talking about something to do with that sub-brand's efficacy in that category. And that is in fact very important in this situation, because that's exactly what this sub-brand was diagnosed to carry. It was diagnosed to carry not just an overall quality, the master brand already had that, but a specific efficacy in relation to the category in question. And also it had a fairly significant type of brand recognition, which means that a lot of people were not buying the master brand, they were buying the sub-brand. And again, the same sort of thing as before. We're able to understand what lies behind each of these dimensions through the qualitative summary, which is built from all of the verbatims that we have received, built from the ground up objectively. So we're objectively able to confidently tell our client this is the brand image between master brand and sub-brand. This is where the overlap is. These are the distinctive attributes that each of them brings, which means this is how they can be merged together or presented together on the packaging in a certain hierarchy and so forth, which we're not going to show you, of course. But that is in fact exactly one of the things it allowed us to do. It wasn't the only piece of information that we needed to do that, but it was a very central piece of information in that regard. Let's now move to something a bit deeper. So let's now move to looking at brand, let's call it brand archetype or brand personality. The example I'm going to show you, we could sit around and debate what the difference is between brand archetype and brand personality and so forth. And this is in fact one of the problems that this work used to face, was the argument over semantics. What's an archetype over a personality, over this, that? And look, it's an interesting academic debate, but it's not a fantastic marketing debate, because in the end, all of these things are just aggregated together to create an understanding of the brand anyway. It's just that we just trying to understand it at different levels. And what I'm about to show you now is a major breakthrough, because this is now using both the qualitative and quantitative methodologies combined. We're taking methodology derived from qualitative practice and methodology derived from quantitative practice together to create this. I think maybe for the first time we've broken some ground here in terms of our ability to use only two questions in our quantitative survey, in our Qualantive survey, should I say, because these are qualitative questions, 2 questions to understand the brand archetype and brand position. One of the questions, I'm not going to tell you what we asked because that is our business, so to speak. That's, again, your jigsaw puzzle. But I can tell you that one of the questions was a projective question using our proprietary stimulus. And the next question was an open-ended probed question. Okay, it was about that stimulus. That's how projection works. That's not giving anything away. But nevertheless, our ability to do this at a quantitative level and still obtain the qualitative sensitivity is rather groundbreaking. So we actually have two brands that we would like to present the archetypes for. This is real, but the brands are hidden because that is commercial in confidence, as you might appreciate. However, the results are incredible. Again, through only the use of these two actually rather simple and quick to answer questions administered to hundreds of respondents about these brands. And admittedly, these are very well-known brands, but let's face it, a brand is only going to have a position or a personality if they're a relatively successful, well-known brand anyway. Okay, it's not always the case. A new brand can also have very strong personality, but again, it's got to be known. These are well-known brands, and we were able to understand through the use of these two questions, a projective question and then another open-ended question, we were able to determine that one of the brands occupied the archetypal position of what we call the mother, or better expressed as the maternal archetype. This is not a gendered analysis or anything like that. This is archetypal analysis, and there is a maternal archetype, right? And one of the brands, as you can see here, these are quantitative results using a kind of a max diff type analysis to give us quantified analytical level results with qualitative sensitivity. So you can see here that this brand B is an archetypal mother. It is over-indexing on descriptions of, and I'm not going to tell you how we got to these. Again, that is our proprietary, but descriptions of warmth and friendliness. These words were not presented to anyone, by the way. These are analyzed from completely open-ended responses that are non-prompted with any lists or any words whatsoever. So warmth and friendliness, loyalty and dependability, and even a sense of fun and playfulness is where that managed to significantly discriminate on those dimensions. And when you put those together, that is in fact referring to the archetypal maternal position. And I'm not going to tell you what brand this is, but if you knew this brand, you would agree wholeheartedly. And you might say, well, I kind of already knew that to an extent, but that it's only because the brand is so well known. However, this actually tells us beyond doubt what the archetype is felt to be. And this is the whole thing. It's generated through projection and through association, which gives us access to the subconscious. And that's what this is telling us. This brand is acting as a maternal role as a brand across its categories. Whereas this other brand, which also exists in many of the same categories as the other brand, is functioning more as what we call an archetypal leader. So if you look at the kind of attributes that are being spoken about here, like intelligence and wisdom and strength and leadership, and it's discriminating quite strongly on those particular dimensions. Again, these dimensions were not presented to respondents. No lists to go through, no preordained archetypes. This comes from pure qualitative understanding at the quantitative level. I think we will leave it at that today. Just as a summary, it is now possible through the Qualantive system to understand all of the intricacies of the brand, ranging from I call it its more rational image to its more subconscious personality and archetype, by combining the methods using the qualitative practice, transferring that into our survey instrument, and then using our qualitative chatbots to actually understand the response to those projective instruments, which laddered beautifully, purely through analysis. No top-down guru analysis or guru insight here. This is bottom-up. This is what relevant consumers told us they felt about these brands. So it really is a revolution after all these years to go from a cumbersome qualitative exercise to get these insights into what is an elegant, refined, simple set of questions, but of course employing the awesome power of the Qualantive methodology. Thank you for listening so far if you have, and we'll speak again soon. Goodbye.